Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to No More Week 2025 Tech Summit. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some general housekeeping items. So you're signed in as a participant and your camera and microphone are disabled. Today's session will be recorded for future viewing. One quick note before we get started, the contents of this session may be triggering, and if you'd like to reach out for support, you'll find a link in the chat to the No More's global directory. A global directory of specialist domestic and sexual violence services. And a trigger, and then a trigger warning will pop up in the chat that will direct you to it if you would like to access those resources. Finally, if you have questions for the guest speakers today, please type them into the Q&A box and we'll address as many questions as possible towards the end of the session. Thank you for your cooperation. We really hope you enjoy the session for today. So just to get started, we're going to do some quick introductions, and then we're going to go into some questions and panel discussion, and then the Q&A. So my name is Kyle Linton. I'm the executive director and co-founder of R-Wave, and we're a 501c3 that builds online tools and technology to support survivors of sexual violence, domestic violence, and child abuse. Alongside me today here are several amazing panelists, some that I've gotten the pleasure to meet over the past few years. Starting with Drew Crescenti. So Drew turned his personal tragedy into a solution to prevent teen dating violence. He founded Jennifer Ann's Group, a nonprofit that produces and publishes pro-social video games intentionally designed to prevent violence. Additionally, we've got Kara Wasser, and she is an innovative entrepreneur dedicated to addressing challenges in communication across healthcare and victim services. She developed Ohana Link Baby, an app for expectant mothers, and Looped Fusion Purple, an app that allows victims to discreetly connect with their advocates. We also have Sue Harper, and Sue is the Deputy Director of Domestic Violence and Sexual Violence Prevention at Hestia. And she's got extensive experience working with children affected by domestic abuse, as well as survivors and perpetrators. And then finally, we have Phoebe Crowder. And Phoebe is a Global Digital Programs Director of Hope After Harm. For Vodafone Group, she leads technological initiatives for the prevention and early identification of violence against women and girls. So now that we've gotten through introductions quickly, I wanted to just give you a couple quick notes. So violence against women and girls is a pervasive global issue affecting 1 in 3 women at some point in their lives. This violence manifests itself in many forms, including physical, sexual, emotional, and digital, transcending cultural, societal, and economic boundaries. While technological advancements present new challenges in addressing this crisis, they also offer significant opportunities to combat these issues. And really, technology, as all of us sort of represent today, has the potential to be an essential ally in raising awareness, providing immediate support, and driving systemic change in our efforts against gender-based violence. So today, we're really going to explore just how these technologies can act as a transformative tool for progress, enabling us to support survivors better, hold perpetrators accountable, and work towards ultimately eradicating violence against women and girls. So just to get started, I'd like to start off with a question to Phoebe. So technology has introduced a range of innovative solutions and opportunities for supporting victims and preventing gender-based violence. Could you discuss how these advancements have transformed the sector over the last 10 years?
Of course. Thank you for having me. The advancements have and just continue to take these just huge strides in the sector. And honestly, we could probably spend this entire hour talking about this one question. So I will try to sort of touch on as much as possible. But I think it's important kind of just to start by saying that whilst technology is transforming the gender-based violence landscape in the most amazing ways, with every kind of advancement comes the evolution of risk and ways to perpetrate violence. And today the lineup is covering that with all the complexity required. But before we ever dive into kind of those positive opportunities, I think it's really important just to acknowledge that. If we look to the last 10 years and sort of firstly at the ways kind of it's directly supporting survivors, if we say look to the criminal justice system, the use of things like virtual courtrooms, remote testimony, even during COVID, we saw these kind of huge jumps in things like e-systems being set up for survivors to get emergency protection orders, just really exciting ways to be able to access things that just previously were a lot more difficult without technology. And the sector is just stretched so thinly with a lack of resources and funding. What I really see tech kind of coming in and supporting is this kind of filling of the gaps and supplementing service provisions. So remote services, online therapeutic support, even things like peer-to-peer support, like Women's Aid's Survivor platform. Kind of these services all exist in person, but tech has really allowed kind of options in terms of accessibility and availability to survivors who might not have been able to reach them before. And I guess that's not to say tech is not to replace specialist service provisions, but it is kind of about reducing those barriers to them and supplementing provisions that already exist. Then we also kind of have these more advanced solutions like apps and chatbots and even AI platforms now that are kind of offering all of these various different options to survivors. But if I look at apps, because that's my area of work, we often kind of talk about this 15-minute window that survivors will have to find information that they need. And the amazing thing about apps is they offer this kind of one-stop shop kind of to find the majority of the information a person might need to find in that kind of first instance. Even if, say, we were to just look at legal information, it's been kind of reported in some studies that 14% of survivors are finding that they get the answers to the legal questions they need through digital products like apps, and that is without having to make appointments and go to legal meetings. So there are really so many barriers that survivors face, and kind of whether that's access, fear of judgment, ineffective help, and tech is just bridging those gaps. And that can also be at kind of high risk. So we are literally looking at tech saving lives. So if you think about covert technology over the last 10 years, we're seeing things like panic button apps, wearable tech, and these are connecting survivors to emergency services or indeed kind of emergency contacts and supporting them to reach help faster. And then kind of at the other end of that, we have prevention. So you've mentioned it briefly already, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it in this webinar, but we're seeing sort of the root causes being addressed through teaching young people through apps and games. And then we've got kind of this evolution of social media too, where we are seeing real-time dialogue around high-profile cases and advocates kind of taking to social media to teach about gender-based violence. And in our own work at Bright Sky, we've seen sort of through the Vodafone Group, their social media campaigns reaching tens of millions of people, helping to sort of get everyone to stand up and understand their role in gender-based violence. And if we kind of just take a step out there and think about that macro view of how tech has been helping, we see it sort of influencing policy and addressing kind of how we can resource allocate through the way it's helping us to crowdsource data and find patterns, and even using AI to predict trends. So I guess to very concisely try and gather 10 years in just a few minutes, what we're seeing is that tech is able to address gender-based violence in a way where we are looking at it from that kind of socio-ecological framework. So that means from individual survivors all the way up into impacting communities and societal levels in government policy. And it's just really exciting to see.
No, absolutely. I think tech has immense opportunity to sort of improve the accessibility and the resources that we're providing and advocates are providing to survivors. Just to sort of extend upon that question, so this next question is directed at Sue. So Sue, Hestia launched V1 of Bright Sky in the spring of 2016. What inspired the team at Hestia to even consider how tech could improve the journey to support victim survivors and concerned friends and family members?
Thank you. Thanks, Phoebe. Well, Bright Sky, I mean, it was before my time. I joined Hestia in 2021, but the Bright Sky journey really began in 2016. And with 50 years experience of working with survivors, Hestia recognised that accessing support for domestic abuse was often hindered by fear, isolation and control exerted by perpetrators. Many victim survivors struggled to find safe ways to seek help and often didn't know where to turn. So in collaboration with Vodafone and those using our refuges, Hestia explored how technology could bridge this gap and identified an opportunity to leverage digital tools to provide discreet, accessible and reliable information. And from the beginning, Bright Sky was designed to raise awareness, empower those in need and guide them towards safety and support. And with innovative features like cover mode, which concealed the app's true identity behind a weather, calendar or gaming facade, the aim was to allow users to access support without arising suspicion. I was also going to just mention, because I think the other technological tech things we do are also online safe spaces. And online safe spaces were a natural extension of our physical safe spaces, which had been developed in response to growing concerns about a rise in domestic abuse during the national COVID-19 lockdown. So we understood that staying at home was the furthest away from staying safe for survivors. And UK Says No More, hosted by Hestia, launched physical safe spaces inside high street banks and pharmacies across the UK. And this self-service model allows victim survivors to use a private and confidential room to make calls, access Bright Sky and other local information. So as a part of the Safe Space initiative, Online Safe Spaces launched in the summer of 2020 in partnership with Royal Mail Group. And it provides a free and discreet service for any organisation to adopt onto their internal or external webpage, internal database, SharePoint, for example, or internal wellbeing page. And like Bright Sky, Online Safe Spaces provides a host of helpful links, information, including when to dial 999, national helpline information, local services, and so on. And it also includes a questionnaire to determine whether they might be experiencing domestic abuse. The portal is usually located on the footer of a website page and is displayed as the UK Says No More logo. And when clicked, it opens as a pop-up window, leaves no internet history trace, and provides quick exit options for the user. The vision for both Bright Sky and Online Safe Spaces was to harness tech to make help available at the touch of a button, empowering survivors and those supporting them to take informed action, providing a digital lifeline for those who might be able to access traditional services such as face-to-face or phone support. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Kicking it back quickly to Phoebe. So the team at Hope After Harm and Hestia really joined forces on the version 2 of Bright Sky, which ultimately served to improve its UX and content. So with the support of Vodafone Foundation, you've since adapted it for use in global markets. Can you tell us a little bit more about that journey and just give us some details about that process to create that V2 and expand?
Yeah, I mean, it would be my pleasure. So I won't go into too much detail kind of about version 2 because we would just run out of time. But I think what's really exciting is to talk about kind of how, thanks to Vodafone Group, we had this opportunity to take Bright Sky kind of from the UK into other markets. And I think what was most important kind of in that first instance for us was to honour that country, not simply to kind of translate this app and just drop it in this new location, because whilst we know domestic abuse and gender-based violence, it's very much a global issue. There is cultural nuance, and from the law to survivors' experiences and even the way in which violence is spoken about country to country, it was really important that we honoured that, because domestic abuse can be a really isolating experience. And so for us, it was really imperative when someone downloaded our product that they didn't just go in there and feel like it wasn't written for them. We didn't want to exacerbate that feeling of isolation. So as with all of our processes, it's very simple in the sense of, first and foremost, it is always that local survivor's voice. And we did this by joining forces with each local Vodafone Foundation and building a team of experts. We have specialist domestic violence organisations, governments and ministries, and in some of our markets, police forces as well. And we worked extremely closely with them for many months, working through the content to make sure that the legal system was represented correctly, the tone of voice was right, cultural context, adjusting case studies, and even where needed, adding in new content that was kind of specific to that market. And I can tell you, we would spend sometimes a whole session talking about a sentence or scenario, and that is to make sure that everything was just perfect, because the teams are just really dedicated to making sure that this is a local product. So whilst my team manage the project, the local teams really lead it with their expert knowledge and the voice of survivors that they support. And that is from the initial creation, but all the way through to testing and launch. And even now, the way in which we run this program is that each country has their own sort of in-house team of these various experts and local foundations. So it's constantly driven by that local voice, despite being a global program. And I think what's nice to kind of note here is that as we began to sort of go into these markets where English wasn't their first language, what we began to learn is kind of that complexity of tone and wording when it comes to translation. So it wasn't even as simple as localizing. What we had to do was make sure that translators we were using understood the context of the work that we were doing, because the tone of voice when speaking about gender-based violence can be so important. And we have what we call kind of a bright sky voice, which is not overly formal and is simple in the way that it speaks. So making sure that we had the right suppliers for that was really important. But secondary to that was really honouring sort of the cultural differences and intersectional experiences that exist within a country. So, for example, in New Zealand, we're working with a country that has a rich Indigenous heritage. And we wanted to really make sure, alongside the in-country experts we had, that we were working with by and for organisations to ensure that we were honouring and representing this, and not just treating a country as kind of a homogenous collective. It's really important that we are making sure everyone feels represented. And I mean, 13 markets on and 23 languages later, we're kind of still looking to keep growing. But we have a version 3.0 now, not even just the 2.0 you're speaking about, a website, and more recently, a Bright Sky web widget, which kind of replicates that online safe spaces that Sue was speaking of, but in the global context. So it's been a really exciting and busy time.
So,
Sounds good.
Kara, just getting back to the question again, would you give us some clarity on sort of your background and Loop Solutions and everything, and we'll sort of get restarted here?
Yeah, sure. So just to kind of restart, we had a bunch of domestic violence agencies in our area come to us. They knew what we were doing in the healthcare space. We were connecting family and friends safely and privately during health-related events. And during the very early days of COVID, they saw some of that tech and said, "Hey, we need a better, safer way to interact and engage with survivors using mobile devices. Please help us." And so at that time, we engaged 7 agencies across the state of Pennsylvania to really understand a lot of the challenges and barriers to using mobile devices, specifically phones and tablets, as a service provider that is doing everything that they can to protect their survivors, yet there's so many barriers and risks to using mobile devices. And so just to kind of go through some of those before, so you have more context of understanding what we actually addressed. Devices change, phones get smashed, you lose contact with your survivors that you're working with, creating barriers to get access to help. Phone numbers change. Data and minutes are restricted by abusers. They often don't have the capabilities to even make phone calls because their data is shut off. Incoming phone calls from an advocate are risky because they're often intercepted or their phone numbers are exposed, putting them at risk. Phone bills and call logs are monitored. Phones are being cloned. An exact replica of the device is in the hands of the abuser. So they're getting access to incoming calls, text messages, emails, social media activity, and then text messages that are being intercepted. So advocates are unsure if they're even speaking with their survivors. And then we come down to the 18 to 24-year-olds who are the most vulnerable population, at least here in the US. And traditional ways of receiving services are just becoming outdated and less effective. Knowing that the percent of victims that seek traditional help by coming into a facility is in the 20% range leaving 80% of survivors out in our communities with no safe connection to help. And so that was what we came in to address. We had to find a better way to help advocates integrate technology into their advocacy workflows. And so we built a system that is safely accessible for that over 70% of survivors whose devices are being monitored by their abusers. So we know that that high percentage of abusers are monitoring the activity on mobile devices. And so with our solution that we built, we addressed all of those barriers to access. And so to address the access point first, because if access wasn't safe, that nothing else that we built would matter. And so, like Phoebe and Sue have addressed with disguised access points, we took it even one step further, and instead of making it covert, we made it completely clandestine in that our access point is a fully functioning game. So if an abuser discovers the game or it is cloned onto another device, there is no way to discover what the actual or true nature of that game is. And a survivor will receive an ID code from their service provider to unlock the game, and it connects them to their portal. And then within that portal, they can, make phone calls. They can get access to all of the tools and resources that the agency would typically, hand to them in paper form. They can chat with their advocate teams. They can get access to national and international resources. Safely make calls with no minutes or data needed using a voice over IP system that is built into our secure browser. So we're not even using the browsers that are on the device, like the Google or the Safari, like on iOS. And so we're really taking all of the all measures to make sure that the activity that occurs from within inside the portal for that victim is completely undiscoverable by a potential abuser that would be monitoring their activity. And so all of that to say, a lot of the safety features that we've built are beneficial to the survivors. But what we have found is that being able to, send messages without worrying about an abuser potentially intercepting them, or being able to call a survivor without your phone number showing up on the call log or phone bill, and also being able to manage all client communications in one platform has really removed a lot of barriers for advocates, and creating efficiencies in their ability to manage that ever growing, influx of individuals that are seeking help.
Yeah, amazing, Kara. Thank you for sharing some more about y'all's solution and just how it impacts the lives of survivors and giving them those clandestine tools. Sue, could you jump in here and answer a quick question? Could you elaborate a little bit more on the potential risks of alternative communication methods? And really, how could user feedback and thoughtful design be employed to address and mitigate those risks to ensure we're building the best solutions for survivors?
So I think what we just need to acknowledge is, it's all going so quickly, so I think it's just this constant need to reassess and look at safety and development the whole time. I mean, for us, and I'll just zip through around Bright Sky UK. In terms of, so our main risks as we see them is perpetrator monitoring. We know that abusers often track digital activity, and it increases the risk of apps and websites being discovered. And as I said, as technology advances, so do the tools that can be used to further perpetrate abuse. I think there's a false sense of security sometimes that users might assume that their digital footprint is undetectable, when in fact abusers may use spyware or other tactics to access information or identify activity. And I think I could spend a lot of time just kind of thinking about that. But I think also, I mean, the obvious one are data privacy breaches. We all have that issue about sensitive data being stored and how it needs to be stored securely. And then there's another one that we consider, which is around digital exclusion. Not everyone has access to technology, and particularly older victim survivors who are often overlooked, particularly till recently. So I think I mentioned it. So to mitigate some of these risks, Hestia's implemented the following safety measures, and as I say, they're subject to ongoing review. But Bright Sky UK, during 23 to 24, we kind of increasingly recognised the subtle shifts in the landscape of domestic abuse, and particularly the surge in tech abuse. And we consulted with survivors and experts from across the UK domestic abuse sector to review the safety features of Bright Sky. And that ongoing feedback is crucial in identifying risk and improving security measures. And this is also embedded in our service model through our lived experience group within the domestic abuse and sexual violence prevention team, and also our Better Lives Forum across all Hestia services. In addition, there's a feedback function within the app itself. Reviews of the app are monitored on a weekly basis by our Everyone's Business IDVAs and ISVAs, independent domestic violence advocates. And where possible, we avoid gathering open-ended feedback, reserving this for forums like focus groups and one-to-one interviews. And for all feedback, we need to be clear about what feedback we want to gather through the products and why we need it and what we're going to do with it. We introduced enhanced cover mode. What we actually did was, on the back of some feedback, we were originally going to remove cover mode because we were concerned that it was giving a false sense of security. However, further consultation identified that actually survivors were very definitely using it, and using it, in a really positive way, and did not want cover mode introduced, removed. So what we did, we introduced a warning notice that users must acknowledge before proceeding to activate cover mode. We also do a guided safety review where users are asked if they're using the app for themselves, a friend or family member, or within a workplace. And those using it for themselves complete a simple safety assessment. We've repositioned, interestingly, the different approaches, but we've repositioned Bright Sky, and continue to do so, as an app for everyone. So what we want is that by encouraging a wider audience to download the app, we aim to reduce the stigma and eliminate the need for concealment. And we're hoping that this will create domestic abuse safe communities and foster safety and awareness in various contexts. So I've said we speak to three key audiences. For myself, if you get on the app and you ask it, it'll ask you if you're accessing it for yourself, for a friend or family member, or for work or within your workplace. And so they're some of the mitigations we've taken. And then with online safe spaces, I think the main thing is just to note that no personal data is collected. We're really clear on guidance around, while we're providing a host of helpful links and information, we're kind of really clear about when to dial 999. And we only collect data around user behaviour, such as the items clicked or how long time is spent on the portal. So we're kind of key on that. But I think we're also clear on both that this ongoing, we cannot absolutely 100% say that these apps and technology is it can't be filtered, as it were, by perpetrators.
Thank you, Sue. Appreciate your sort of clarity and thoughts around that, and all the experience and work that y'all have put into these areas. Shifting bases just a little bit here to Drew. So wanted to talk a little bit about your organization, Jennifer Ann's group. So y'all have found a way to use technology in prevention work and raising awareness. So can you talk about a little, how did you come up with this idea? Why do you think that games are so effective in teaching young people about these issues, and just elaborate a little bit more in those areas?
Sure. Thank you, Kyle. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate this. So when I first created Jennifer Ann's group, it was in response to a tragedy. My daughter was a senior in high school, and she was killed by her ex-boyfriend. I had no idea that teen dating violence was as pervasive or as dangerous as it is. And I felt like I was a parent who was quite aware of what teenagers were facing. And so I thought, well, if I have little awareness, I don't know how many other people might have it. So for the first 2 years of our organization, I was very focused on awareness, because in the absence of awareness, people don't know that this is an issue that they need to investigate, that they need to inform themselves about. But I found it was really difficult to increase awareness about something that doesn't already have some awareness around it. And so we tried a variety of approaches to try and get young people to come to us. And I started thinking maybe it makes more sense for me to go to where they are instead. And so as I explored that, we tried a variety of different strategies and techniques and different forms of media. And one of the many thoughts I had was, why not video games? I know that people play video games, so maybe what we need to do is create a video game. But I did not know how to create a video game. And I did not have the budget to hire a team of folks to create a video game. And frankly, I didn't know what that video game would necessarily look like. So we created a game design challenge. In 2008, we launched the first ever Life Love Game Design Challenge with this intriguing premise of, can you create a video game about teen dating violence without using any violence in the game itself? And that was intriguing enough that we actually got some media coverage, including a brief mention in Newsweek. So we did get some entries and we got a few games to publish. And I said, I think that this is going to work. And over the years, we've learned more and more about how really effective this approach is, because it does more than just increase awareness. It does more than just knowledge transfer. I was really pleased and surprised to learn that these games are persuasive games. They are effective at taking somebody who already might have some unhealthy attitudes or beliefs about things like healthy relationships and gender norms, and it can change them through the single gameplay. And 2 published studies have actually validated this. So the more time that has gone on, the more that we have focused on this persuasive nature of the games. So every year we run a game design challenge where we have people from around the world that submit ideas about games. Once they become a finalist, they're then tasked with, they have several months to create their games. And then we have subject matter experts who judge the games. And once we pick the winning games, we then work on the games or work with the developers or studios themselves to get the games ready for us to publish them. You know, it's very important, of course, that these games all be very trauma informed. We know that young people who are likely to be drawn to our games are those very same people who have more likely than the general population to have already experienced some form of trauma or abuse. And so we need to be trauma informed. We certainly need to be very privacy conscious. So we need to make sure that any content we have, including our websites, that we're not tracking people, we're avoiding cookies, we're jumping through the extra hoops so that it's less likely that the person making use of our services, that other people will discover what they're doing. But additionally, so, you know, essentially what we're doing through the games is we're first seeking to engage them, then we're educating them, and then we are empowering them. Although most of the games have been about teen dating violence, the past few years, we focused a little more broadly. Basically, after the lockdown and after COVID, we recognized that at that point, all young people had experienced some form of trauma. Their adverse childhood experience scores had all gone up because they weren't graduating from high school or going to homecoming or visiting family members, and they're cut off from their support networks. We all experienced that, but we weren't all teenagers or tweens experiencing that. And so in 2021, the topic for our game design challenge was resilience. And that was very well received because resilience is one of the protective factors against violence, not only intimate partner violence, but also engaging in other forms of violence or accepting of violence directed towards you, as well as in their communities. Since then, the other protective factor games, critical thinking. Last year was social connectedness. And just last week, we launched our brand new game design challenge, which is on communication. And what we're asking is, as healthy communicators, as people who are adept at communicating, what changes can you make, not only your own life, but in your communities? And so there's kind of three focuses here. One is about what we're calling fact sharing. So people who, rather than spreading rumors, making sure that we're only sharing facts. It's safer to talk about fact sharing than calling it misinformation. We're also talking about the impact of good communication skills in conflict resolution. And then third, the most obvious for us, is healthy relationships. Obviously with your partner, but also with your friends, your peers, your coworkers, in your communities, the value of healthy communication. And so right now, people have the opportunity to submit a game pitch, an idea about a communication game, and they have until March 24th to do that. We have $10,000 in prizes that we're giving away. And so we would love for people to visit communicating.games, check out the information there. And even if you don't enter the contest, look at the communication resources on there. One thing we do every year when we launch these contests, we try and provide a lot of information so that the people can become better informed about the topic before they actually submit an entry to the contest. So once we have these games, once they have been published, we're very focused on accessibility. So we try to make sure that all our games can be played in a web browser. We know that not everybody has a computer at home. Not every school has a computer lab. But very often there's something like a public library. And if a game can be played in the web browser, you can go to a public library or somewhere that there's public internet and you can play the game because you're not installing anything on the computer. And so there's no security risks involved with that. The other aspect of making it accessible, all of our games are free, because even if we charge 1 penny, some young person who wants to learn this information needs a debit card, a gift card, or a credit card to send us that 1 penny. And so we make everything free. And again, aligned again with the privacy issues, there's no ads in any of our games either. And what we're doing with these games is we're focused on 3 core groups that we're trying to reach. We really want to reach educators, because those educators who have been tasked with teaching this stuff in schools have not always been given a budget to do so. And so we love reaching educators. We've created standards aligned lesson plans for them to use in the classroom along with these games, so that if there is a mandate for them to teach this, but they have no money to do so, please use our resources, our lesson plans, slide decks, and games in your class. And then there's those parents who say, I don't want somebody else teaching my child about consent, for example. I want to do it. That's wonderful. We want parents to do that. So parents, please go through our games, find a game that you think will resonate with your child, ask them to play it on their own without you looking over their shoulder so they can experience and learn from it. Afterwards, the two of you can have a conversation about the game, about the characters, and not really as much about the young person. And so this way you have a conversation that's more likely to be free-flowing and hopefully helpful. And then the third group are the young people themselves. So if you're not learning this in school, if your parents aren't teaching you this, we do want young people themselves to feel empowered to learn about these things. As I said, most of our games are about broadly teen dating, violence, and healthy relationships. We do have several consent games. They're not all appropriate for all ages, but we do have games appropriate for a range of ages, because we think when it comes to consent, you really need to start early, and every year maybe give them a new game. But we have games that are appropriate for all ages, and you could start with, say, Adrift, which was a game that was repurposed into a life-size exhibition in a museum in Australia. We think that that's a great game and it's safe for everybody. You don't have to worry about having the talk with your child in order for them to learn about consent. But just be aware, some of our games do have content warnings, and just pay attention to that. So we think that this is a really powerful way to reach young people. Not only that, these are expert systems because the subject matter expertise is baked into the game. And if it's not in the game when we get it from the people who enter the contest, we make sure we put it in there. And that's why we have 12 to 18 judges on our panel who make sure that everything we have in there is accurate and is as helpful as possible. So we are excited about this prospect, and we always love having the opportunity to get the word out. And we do hope that people will at least visit the communicating.games website, check out the contest, share it with people, and even learn something about the value of communication when it comes to, you know, healthy relationships, but also healthy communities for all of us.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing some more about the work that y'all are doing, Drew. And just quick from a quick housekeeping note, we've got about 11 minutes left. One request is that if folks do have questions, I do want to make sure that we're saving about 5 minutes to answer some specific questions that people have. So please put those in the Q&A portion of the Zoom. So just to shift quickly to two final questions and do some kind of quick rapid fire answers. So a lot of us are building very different tools and technologies that serve different purposes for survivors. Maybe just going around the room really quickly, can you talk just for a second about what mechanisms that you use? And we've talked about a little bit, you know, focus groups, individual interviewing, surveys. Can you talk about some other methods that you use to incorporate survivor feedback in the building of your technology? And let's try to make this quick and be 30 seconds just to give some other folks ideas about how to gather feedback to build the best possible product. I guess, Phoebe, could we start with you really quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone else will touch on things that they are doing, and I'd like to actually just take those 30 seconds to talk about something that we have learned and we are about to be doing. So
Totally.
we are in the midst right now of building a global survivor network. So what we are seeing and have always known, as everyone here is mentioning, is that survivor and user voices need to be at the center of everything that we do. And that's not just to pay lip service, it's to make sure that they are really co-collaborating with us. So we are looking kind of to build this, like I said, network over the 13 markets that we work in to make sure that we are really hearing consistently those voices from survivors, and they can become co-collaborators with us in the work that we do. So not just feeding in, but actually providing us those next steps, working with us in kind of strategy and communications. And I think it is one of those bigger next steps, but is something that if you are sort of more established, is something really exciting to look to. How can you sort of build an authentic voice network to make sure that you are consistently working in that survivor focused way?
Absolutely. Kara, Sue, Drew, any other thoughts about sort of incorporating survivor feedback in your work and iterating?
Yeah, well, we work directly with the domestic violence agencies and service providers. So a lot of our feedback comes directly from them. In the beginning of 2022, we actually did a large usability study to make sure that, you know, the system was trauma informed and that we were, you know, easily accessible, but also, you know, really not reinventing the wheel as far as, you know, access goes. So we were just we've just received a lot of feedback. We've spent a lot of time with our direct service providers to make sure that we're meeting the needs and the demands of such a sensitive market.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll say that on our judges panel, about half of them are usually right now people that are at universities teaching game design, but we always make sure that we include people who work for IPV or domestic violence shelters, as well as our advisory board is all psychologists, former school counselors. So these are all people that are very focused on being trauma informed, and either they themselves are survivors or they've been working to help survivors for many years.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Drew, I agree. It is the inclusion of not just the victim survivors, but also the professionals and DAs experts that can also sit alongside, not only keeping victim survivors safe, but also providing that kind of interface around anything that might be developed, but also that feedback, you know. And I just think for me, the key bit to this safety first design is the collaboration. So the victim survivors, the DA experts, and the tech experts, you know, that collaboration in terms of prioritizing survivor agency on all our decisions, it has to be sitting, you know, at the heart of any feedback review process.
Absolutely. I think those are all great points. It's really leveraging, you know, the best folks at technology, the advocates that are representing survivors, getting direct feedback from survivors, and all together doing movement building to build these best tools that, you know, we can scale for different purposes and reasons to support survivors. I think that all totally makes sense. So just quickly, we've got about 6 minutes left. There's one more question I wanted to address and go around the room quickly and then answer a couple quick questions. I did notice in the chat that some folks were asking about the consent games and you know, had specific questions for you, Drew. So I don't know if somebody can help put that in the chat for the audience. That would be extremely helpful, just to provide those links and resources for everyone. And then really the last question I wanted to sort of ask this group is, obviously to build these tools and technologies is extremely expensive and difficult. And, you know, it requires thoughts on marketing and technology and user feedback and scale. So there's the obvious sort of fundraising question that comes into play. Like, how do we get funding? How do we think about non-traditional funding mechanisms to do this sort of work? So maybe just quickly in about 30 seconds, if everyone could address, you know, their thoughts on sort of the funding landscape and ecosystem for this, and not maybe provide some insights to the audience on non-traditional methods of gathering funding or getting resources to build these different tools and technologies. You know, Drew had some amazing, you know, ideas that he shared, but certainly, Drew, I'm sure you have a million more, but I'm curious if other folks here want to talk about sort of the fundraising to accomplish this work and complete this work together. In no particular order, so anybody feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in really briefly. I think we are really blessed at Bright Sky Global to have kind of the commitment of the Vodafone Foundation. So in that sense, we are less having to kind of go out and find alternative means in terms of funding. But I think it's really important to kind of call on other kind of large international organisations and government to step up and play their part in this. Sue spoke so beautifully kind of to collaboration. And I think in that sense, funding these kind of initiatives comes down to collaboration too, because when we're looking at kind of for-profit organisations, governments, specialists coming together, we can create this really amazing kind of ecosystem. We're all pushing towards the same mission, but there are certain things like platform and resources and funding that governments and for-profit organisations have that we in the sector just don't. So I think kind of as we continue to push forward, especially since COVID, with this understanding more where governments are saying, okay, we really have a part to play here and we have money we need to address with this, it's understanding that technology plays a really key role in that. Like we've said, it kind of alleviates a lot of pressure off of those specialist services by bridging those barriers and gaps. So how can we make sure that technology is a part of those kind of funding cycles as well, so that it can support the really important on the ground specialist services who are providing that support to survivors?
Yeah, and just building on that, Phoebe, I think it's this whole, thinking about the community response for us. It's kind of that it is everyone's business. It is everybody's responsibility. We have responsibility, and you will increase funding opportunities if people are, you know, have bought into why it's so important and what we're trying to achieve and why this is so necessary. And there's so many ways that we can leverage that. But for me, it's this wider awareness around, you know, it's community responsibility, it's a social responsibility. So then we can attract more innovative ways of funding. I haven't figured it out yet, but I think it's just these days, if only I could. But I just think it's in terms of we very good at designing fantastic things, but then ensuring the sustainability beyond the initial launch is really difficult. And we have to keep on top of it, because otherwise, as I said earlier, the safety of people gets compromised. We've got to be ahead of it all the whole time.
I'll just jump in and I guess kind of wrap up and say, you know, we're a for-profit company. We've been funded by incredible investors that believe in our mission. But, you know, we are also selling to an industry that is lacking resources. And so we've gotten really creative in leveraging our communities, in finding sponsors for agencies through corporations, through private donors, and those types of funding sources, so that we're not necessarily, you know, dipping into their already restrained budgets, but helping them to leverage the communities that they're in and helping them find alternative sources for technology, because technology is not something that they have typically or historically had to budget for. And so we're seeing a shift now in organizations that are starting to budget for technology. But in the meantime, there's a desperate need for it. We don't have time to wait for budgets and budget cycles and all of those things. And so by leveraging communities and funders and large corporations, we've been able to help many organizations and continue our efforts to you know, expand that.
I'll say something real quickly. Our process has been very organic, which means that we've learned a lot of really important lessons, but it also means that funding has been a nonstop challenge for us. We rely on small people, small businesses, all kinds of folks to fund us. We apply for grants. We almost never do get them, but we are fortunate that we are now actually a subgrantee for an NIH grant for the next 2 years, working with Emory University. And so we're hoping that this is the beginning of us having more stability in terms of funding. But we really do want the tech sector, and we'd love for the gaming sector to support work like this, not just ours, but all of this work, to show people the good that can be done with technology. We want to go beyond just expecting the government to help us out, and we really hope that everybody can get on board. I'm going to Europe in a couple of weeks to meet with folks and speak at the Games for Health Europe conference, because I know that the reality is in the United States right now, what I'm saying is a little more problematic than it was a few years ago. So good luck to everybody dealing with that situation.
Thank you, everyone. Just to get things wrapped up here, obviously funding is a huge challenge for this sort of work, but what I'm so excited about just working with some of the partners in this room and Know More and these other organizations is that we're all really coming together to do this work, to develop these different technology solutions for different purposes, to really move this space forward in supporting survivors. So I wanted to say thank you to Know More for organizing this session. I'm sure that our contact information will be shared for the different initiatives and problems that we're working on. So if you want to get in contact with us with more specific questions, please feel free to do so. But I appreciate everyone's time and coming to this session today. Yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and enjoys the rest of the Know More week.